A very good evening from Westminster. Well, the marathon had hardly started, and yet Theresa May has already suffered three major defeats in the House of Commons this evening. And before MPs even began considering the Prime Minister's withdrawal deal, a European judge made clear that Britain can likely pull back from Brexit without the permission of the rest of the EU, in a case the government had tried but failed to stop. Well, the first of three defeats for Mrs May saw MPs vote against a government proposal to delay a ruling on whether it acted in contempt of Parliament by not publishing its full legal advice on the withdrawal deal. Now, the government narrowly lost that vote by 311 to 307, so by 4. So the Commons went on to vote immediately on the opposition motion that the government had been in contempt. Now, this one was lost by a big majority, finding by 311 votes to 293 that it had been in contempt. And finally, there was an amendment. Now, this was put forward by the Conservative Remain MP Dominic Grieve. That was voted on. It was designed effectively to take a no-deal Brexit off the table by giving MPs the power to alter any Plan B withdrawal published by the government should it lose the vote on Tuesday. Now, that ended in defeat for the government as well by 321 votes to 299. Well, tonight, that debate continuing in the House of Commons. MPs Anna Soubry, the Remain and second referendum supporter on the Conservative bench is Anna Soubry speaking at the moment. But let's take you back through it, how it started. Opening the debate on the withdrawal agreement, the Prime Minister said that her deal was the best way to bring the United Kingdom back together.
There are those who want a closer relationship with the EU, but they do need to recognise the message that was given by the 52% who voted to leave the European Union. There are others in this House who would prefer a more distant relationship than the one I'm proposing. And although I don't agree, I know they're also arguing for what they think is best for our future, and I respect that too. But the hard truth is also that we will not settle this issue and bring our country together if in delivering Brexit we do not protect the trade and security cooperation on which so many jobs and lives depend, completely ignoring the views of the 48%. We can shut our eyes to these hard truths and carry on debating between these extremes for months to come, or we can accept that the only solution that will endure is one that addresses the concerns of those who voted leave while reassuring those who voted remain. But this, I will take a number of interventions in a minute, when I've just finished this. That this argument has gone on long enough. It is corrosive to our politics, and life depends on compromise.
Well, after the Prime Minister spoke, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn wasted no time on getting stuck into the credibility of the government and the deal in front of MPs.
It really is not credible for the government to come to this House with this deal that does damage a great deal of our economic interests, that does reduce our powers to decide our relationships in the future, does damage our trade, and then say there's no alternative. This House will make its decision next Tuesday. I hope and expect this House will reject that deal. At that point, the government has lost the confidence of the House. I think they should reflect on that.
Well, as I was saying, the debate follows a series of major defeats for the government this evening as MPs voted to give Parliament more of a say over what to do next if Theresa May's deal is voted down next week.
The ayes to the right, 321. The noes to the left, 299.
The ayes to the right, 321. The noes to the left, 299. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock.
Just want to give you more of a flavour of that debate. As you may have seen a glimpse of earlier, Anna Soubry, the Conservative Remain MP, is talking now, so we're going to listen.
To try and inform us of the financial consequences of it. And of course, I'll give way.
Would you agree with me that this is actually exemplified in but Article 107 of the Future Framework on Space, where it just says the parties should consider appropriate arrangements for cooperation on space. That is it.
Indeed it is. It is nothing more than warm words of good intentions, but there's no mention now of the frictionless trade which we were all promised. Services, which make up 80% of our economy, barely get a mention. And of course the political declaration is the high point as we now go into entering negotiations in March. But the worst part of the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration is that it will make our constituents and our country poorer. And I did not come to this place, and I will not vote for anything that makes my constituents poorer, especially when a far better alternative exists. On its own admission, this government is urging people to vote for this so-called deal in the clear knowledge it will reduce the future economic prospects of the people of this country, and that is on their best assessments, or rather guesses, because we know of the inherent problems and the inaccuracy, in effect, of the impact assessments and the forecasts that have made. They just give us the best. In fact, many believe it will be far worse than even those estimates have given. No one should be under any illusions of how bad a place the backstop will be, and I won't rehearse some of the arguments that have been very well put forward by others. It's not just vassalage. It will convey only a bare-bones customs union, none of the regulatory alignment that is so critical for business. Northern Ireland will indeed have limited benefits, but there'll be better benefits than the rest of the United Kingdom, which is clearly a threat to the union of our country. And I say to people on these benches, as members of the Conservative and Unionist Party, on what possible basis can you vote for that? As others have observed, we'll not be able to deliver any of the unicorn trade deals that have so far eluded us, but apparently will magically appear in the next 2 years, nor will we indeed be it seems, be able to benefit from the dozens of great trade deals that we already have, because we are a member of the European Union. And that is the reality of it, Mr. Speaker. This is not what Leave voters in Broxtowe voted for. They've seen through the lies on buses, and they now know of the broken promises. They see that whichever way you cut it, Brexit will make them poorer and reduce the life chances of their children and their grandchildren. And they're entitled, now that they see the reality of Brexit, to change their minds and have a final say by way of a people's vote. Now, it is said it's a price worth paying, but I reject that, Mr. Speaker, because I understand the political consequences, as many say, about the need to deliver this. But we, all of us, have to put our country and our constituents first. And if we do that, we will see and understand the best deal we have is the current deal that we have with the European Union. It's not just good for trade, it's also about the country that we are, open-minded, open-hearted, and I fear for our country if we set course now and agree to this deal and make the grave mistake of leaving the European Union that has conveyed so much prosperity and delivered peace and a better country.
Thank you. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much. And there we are, Anna Soubry encapsulating the problem for Theresa May just within her own party. They're hearing from the Remainer, Anna Soubry, who of course doesn't even want to leave the European Union, but she's opposed to Theresa May's deal, and of course the Brexiteers saying similar things. Their recipes very different, though. Now, just spotted, as you can all see, I'm sure Hilary Benn, the chair of the Brexit committee, the all-party Brexit committee, Labour's Hilary Benn, talking now.
The decisions that the government has made. Firstly, as we have heard, the government embarked on the negotiations with the cries of those who argued for Brexit ringing in their ears. And we need to remember the point my right honourable friend for Derby South made. We will hold all the cards. This will be one of the easiest trade deals in history. Getting out of the EU can be quick and easy. Within 2 years, we can negotiate a free trade area massively larger than the European Union. How slowly the truth has been revealed and how painful a process it has been. Secondly, while the referendum result made clear we're leaving the institutions, it did not determine the future of our economic relationship. Thirdly, And I believe that history will record the Prime Minister's red lines to have been an absolutely catastrophic mistake. Because they created the problem of the border in Northern Ireland. It created the problem. And it removed the government's room for manoeuvre. It boxed the Prime Minister in. And it was the result of those illusions, these decisions, and the plague of disagreement that affected the Cabinet, led to so many ministerial resignations, including the loss of not one but two Brexit secretaries. Goodness me, they exited the department before we even exited the European Union. The government spent 2 years trying to agree on what to ask for. And the result was the contortion that was the Chequers proposal, in an attempt to try and keep that border open, to save friction-free trade. The problem was it was rejected by the European Union. And now is the time, the Prime Minister spoke about home truths, now is the time for some honesty. If we wish to maintain an open border in Northern Ireland, then we will be staying in a customs union and observing most, if not all, of the rules of the single market. But not a single government minister is prepared to acknowledge that truth. The truth is also that those, and it was demonstrated, I have to say, by the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip in his contribution, those who argue for Brexit have been exposed as having absolutely no plan for it at all. A Canada deal would fail to solve the problem of Northern Ireland. A Canada deal would not give us friction-free trade. And as to the suggestion we should leave the EU on WTO terms, which is no deal, I'll return to that in a moment. The problem with this deal is the political declaration. We were assured it would be substantive and detailed. It is not. It is merely words and aspirations that have no legal force. We have no idea where we're going, no idea where we're going to end up, no clarity, no certainty, and for businesses which hate uncertainty, and for future investment which hates uncertainty, what kind of deal is that? The Prime Minister was questioned by my right honourable friend who chairs the Home Affairs Select Committee about security. She was asked why there's no reference to ECRIS and SIS2 in the deal. Do you know what? In 2016, we made 100,000 requests to ECRIS, the police in Britain. In 2017, 500,000 queries to the Schengen Information System 2. Now that tells us how important those two sources of information are to the protection of our security. Neither of them is mentioned in the political declaration. And what about services, foreign policy coordination, policing and information sharing, taking part in EU agencies, fisheries, data?
Hilary Benn there from the Labour side, friendless again in terms of the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement. We'll keep monitoring that debate as it continues. We're expecting at least for another couple of hours, probably. Well, let's check in now with our chief political correspondent, John Craig. He's in the heart of Parliament there in Central Lobby. And John, as we've been saying earlier, the prelude, the background to this debate could hardly have been more bruising for the Prime Minister, losing those votes.
Yes, Dermot, and I'm joined by one of the key players who was instrumental in losing those first two votes. Stephen Gethins is the Scottish National Party's Europe spokesman. You were one of the MPs who signed that letter to the Speaker. What is the significance of, first of all, the votes on parliamentary privilege?
Well, very significant. The Prime Minister lost 3 votes on the trot today, and I think we have to go a long, long way back to get a Prime Minister losing 3 votes. But that vote on contempt is critical, absolutely critical. We've got the historic vote that ministers have been found in contempt of Parliament. And people have to remember this is not a step that we took lightly when we got together in that cross-party group who signed that letter. This, I think, underlines the deep seriousness of the situation in which we've been left in.
That cooperation between the parties, was that as a result of your leader, Nicola Sturgeon, a visit, not the one she made yesterday, but a previous visit when I think you all had a meeting together? Was that where that idea came from?
Well, the SNP have always been clear that in a parliament of minorities we'll have to work with each other. Something happens in the Scottish Parliament, in other legislators elsewhere. But having Nicola down here, meeting up with Jeremy Corbyn, certainly helped that process and has helped that to try and bridge the divides. And she met with Jeremy Corbyn, but she also met with Vince Cable, Caroline Lucas and colleagues in Plaid Cymru as well. It's really important, given where we are at the moment, that we do try and reach out, that we do try and consensus build. One of the problems with the situation that Theresa May has left herself in is for 2 years, instead of working with parties across the House, she's only tried to win over the DUP and her hard right of her party. Now, that does not lead to consensus. That leads to the mess that we've been left in today.
I was about to say, but you hate the Scottish Labour Party and they hate you. I'm a bit surprised that you're talking in such cordial and comradely terms with the Labour Party.
Well, look, the situation that we're in at the moment will have a deep impact on every single industry, on everybody's jobs, on everybody in every part of the United Kingdom, whether or not you're Leave or Remain, whether or not you're pro-independence or in favour of remaining part of the Union. It impacts on everybody. And therefore, it's incumbent on parliamentarians to try, where they can, to find common ground. And that's something we're working hard to do, and something that's very common in other parliaments elsewhere in Europe, where you have a minority government.
Let's talk about the Dominic Grieve amendment. Quite a decent majority there against the government, 321 to 299, majority of 22. Now, this one is against the Prime Minister's deal, but it's also against no deal.
Yeah.
There's a conspiracy theory going around tonight that the government was quite happy to see this one pass because it might put pressure on some of their would-be rebels next week.
Well, I'm not sure if the government was terribly happy about getting gubbed for a third time.
Gubbed? Gubbed.
Getting
Explain
beat.
gubbed.
So getting...
You're not an old firm game now, you know.
Well, or a new firm game if you're a Dundee United fan. But gubbed, they got beat, and they got well beat today. Now, the reason why this is important is this is Parliament truly taking back control. There's that responsibility to reach out. We offered a compromise 2 years ago in terms of the single market customs union. We weren't listened to, but now we have to look at all options on the table. The best option, of course, as the Treasury have told us, and the best deal is remaining part of the European Union.
Well, that's what Anna Soubry's just been arguing in her speech just now. Can you... you've talked about talking to Labour, Liberal Democrats, obviously Plaid, and the one Green MP. How are your relations with the Anna Soubrys and those Tory Remainers?
Well, they're good, and actually you've just referenced Anna Soubry's speech. Look, Anna Soubry and I will disagree on any number of issues, and if you have Anna come here, she'll tell you exactly that. But I think this is what's important, and actually what's common in other European legislators, is you find the common ground where you can find it. Now, we have found the common ground with colleagues in every party in here, that this is a bad deal, that it costs jobs. And we have a responsibility not to sit there and find areas of disagreement, but find areas of agreement. That's what parliamentary democracy should be all about, and right now is all about.
Does the Grieve amendment, do you think, make no deal less likely? Has it killed it off, for example?
Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, the one thing is we cannot have no deal. We think Theresa May's deal is a bad deal, it costs jobs, and no deal is catastrophic. So what we want to do is to lay the best groundwork so that we can get as good a deal as possible out of that vote next week.
And what about, just going back to the first earlier debate, this legal advice, why does it matter? I mean, you got a hefty document yesterday from Geoffrey Cox, the Attorney General. Why does it matter? Isn't it just one for the aficionados, the political anoraks and so on, all this business of publishing the legal advice?
No, we got, as you said, a hefty document with lots of fluff around it, but what we did not get was the advice. Now, MPs have one of the most critical decisions that they will ever make, that any MP will ever make, coming up next week. It is important, it's incumbent on the government to give us all the details they possibly can. And it was really interesting reflecting on the arguments made by much more experienced MPs than me, who were reflecting on the mistakes that were made during the Iraq war vote, when that legal advice wasn't released to MPs, for example. So that's something we have to reflect on as we make that critical decision next week.
Stephen Gethins, thank you very much indeed. Back to you, Dermot, from the House of Commons, where the government's been gubbed.
Now, the former UKIP leader, Nigel Farage, has announced this evening that he has left the party, claiming that under the leadership now of Gerard Batten, its direction has fundamentally changed. Mr Farage had previously called for Mr Batten to be thrown out of the party after he appointed Tommy Robinson, the founder of the English Defence League, as an advisor. Now, in a column he's written for the Daily Telegraph newspaper, Mr Farage said, "And so, with a heavy heart and after all my years of devotion to the party, I am leaving UKIP today." There's a huge space for a Brexit party in British politics, but he says it won't be filled by UKIP.
Good evening. We're live at Westminster, where the Prime Minister has suffered a number of setbacks at the start of 5 days of debate ahead of the main Brexit vote next week. That is a vote that's billed as one of the most significant parliamentary events of recent times. Before the debate got underway, MPs held the government to be in contempt of Parliament because of its refusal to publish in full the legal advice on Brexit. Ministers were then forced to backtrack, and they promised to publish after all. Parliament also voted to have greater influence on the entire Brexit process if Mrs May's deal is defeated next week. And in yet another twist, the European Court of Justice was told that the UK could abandon Brexit without needing the agreement of other EU states. Well, the debate here at Westminster is expected to continue well into the night. We'll have reaction, we'll have analysis and all these developments. And we start with our political editor, Laura Kuensberg.
Parliament's time. The place where Theresa May must persuade. She doesn't want to accept she's defeated. Not yet. But for the first time in decades, before the Prime Minister had even had the chance to speak today, a painful hat-trick.
The ayes to the right, 311. The noes to the left, 293.
Her government was beaten 3 times.
Look at them! Look at them!
Look at their faces, they cry. The sight of a government that doesn't have support it can rely on. Ministers found in contempt, forced now to publish the full Brexit legal advice.
This House has now spoken, and it's of huge constitutional and political significance. It is, I think, unprecedented for this House to find government ministers in contempt.
In light of the expressed will of the House, we will publish the final and full advice provided by the Attorney-General to Cabinet.
The Attorney-General's private advice to Cabinet will meet the public glare. Then another flank.
Mr. Dominic Grieve. The purpose of this amendment is to ensure that if we don't resolve this issue next week, that there will be further amendable motions to be considered.
In other words, former Remain rebels demanded more power for Parliament if Theresa May's deal is rejected next week. And guess what happened next? An even bigger defeat. More influence for MPs if the government's plan falls.
How are the numbers looking?
But talk about brave faces.
I'm feeling very, very confident.
Looking forward to 5 days of Brexit debate?
Always looking forward to debate.
But multiple cabinet ministers say privately there's no way Parliament will back the government. A few brave souls inside think it might be possible. So what's her pitch?
I have spent nearly 2 years negotiating this deal. If I had banged the table, walked out of the room and at the end of the process delivered the very same deal that is before us today, some might say that I'd done a better job. But I didn't play to the gallery. I focused on getting a deal that honours the referendum, sets us on course for a bright future, and I did so through painstaking hard work. Don't let anyone here think that there's a better deal to be won by shouting louder. Don't imagine that if we vote this down, a different deal is going to miraculously appear. The alternative is uncertainty and risk. So I promise you today, this is the very best deal for the British people. I ask you to back it in the best interests of our constituents and our country. And with my whole heart, I commend this motion to the House.
This ordeal is about endurance as well as ideas and arguments.
To vote for this deal would be to damage our economy, to make our constituents poorer, and to take a leap in the dark for the future of this country. Mr. Speaker, Labour will vote against this deal. A bad deal for Britain, a bad deal for our economy, and, I believe, a bad deal for our democracy. Our country deserves better than this.
Remember, Theresa May has no majority on her own. Neither those meant to be her allies, the DUP, are on board, nor any of the opposition parties.
So under these terms, in my view, the UK's future as a strong and independent global trading nation standing together is in real and imminent jeopardy. An outcome that doesn't honour the result of the referendum or take back control of our laws, our money and our borders.
The reality of Brexit is now laid before us. Broken promises of taking back control from a government that is so out of control. 21 ministerial resignations, communities, countries, households divided, our politics stale. A Prime Minister fighting for her political life.
But the reason we're here is and always was the tears inside the Tory party, in full display tonight.
I really can't believe that there is a single member of this House who sincerely believes that this deal we have before us is a good deal for the UK.
There are a lot.
And if I may say, you can tell...
But look, there were.
There's one. He's been here. There's one.
I've got no stake in this government anymore, but I still think it's the right thing to do.
Beneath the camouflage, we find the same old EU institutions as the customs union and the single market, and all of it adjudicated, by the way, by the European Court of Justice. If we vote for this deal, we will not be taking back control, but losing control.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He appears to be one of those who prefers the grievance to the solution. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has come up with a solution. What's his big idea?
I was coming to that.
I will not vote for this deal on any other basis than it goes to the people for their approval. This is not a good deal. In fact, it's not a deal, as many have already observed. It's certainly not what we were promised.
The governing party split in every direction, right in front of our eyes. A week tonight, they'll have to choose which way to go, which corridor to walk through. Is there a real chance of pulling together? Parties divided, Parliament divided, maybe the country too?
Shut out the noise. In the next few days, the Prime Minister will be arguing for her Brexit compromise, her government and her job. Many behind her want to make her ditch her plan for departure, but those opposite want to go further, to force her out. The government will strain everything to make its case to survive. But ultimately, it's this place, Parliament, that will decide.
It feels like this place, what's meant to be all of our place, is taking charge. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Westminster.
So many developments to talk about tonight. In a moment, we'll be talking to Darshini David, our economics correspondent, about the latest warnings from the Bank of England. We'll also be talking to Damien Grammaticus, our correspondent in Brussels, about the events at the European Court of Justice. But first, let's talk to our political editor, Laura Kunzberg, who's with me as well. Laura, defeat after defeat for the Prime Minister today, a big day of setbacks.
Huge, and you have to go back to the 1970s for its equivalent. And actually, even though Theresa May has had so much turmoil, so many travails over the last year and a half, she's only actually been beaten in this way twice before. So a huge day, this hat-trick of humiliation for the Prime Minister, all of it happening before she had to get to her feet to even begin making her case.
And if you're going to focus on one of them, would it be the motion brought forward by Dominic Grieve, the former Attorney General?
It certainly would, and just remind people really clearly what that was about. Essentially, MPs today voted to give themselves more power if and when the Prime Minister's deal with Brussels is rejected. Now, right now, that looks like it is what is going to happen. So essentially, MPs have decided today, overruling the government, that they will have more power to set the course of the government to go for a plan B. And I think what we saw in broad terms today is what will really send a chill up Number 10's spine, is the legislature, Parliament, taking control over the government.
Laura, we'll talk again later. Thanks very much. Laura Kunzberg there for us. Let's go straight to Brussels and talk to Damien, who's there. Damien, let's talk about the European Court of Justice today and that opinion that was expressed there. Tell us about that and what impact it could have.
Hugh, yes, on a day when the Prime Minister
told MPs that the choice they faced was her deal or uncertainty. What we've heard today opens up a route that's certain, possibly, for Parliament if it comes to pass, which would be to cancel Brexit. Now, this concerns a case brought by opponents of Brexit in the UK that's been considered by the European Court of Justice. Today we had the advice from the court's highest legal advisor saying that he believes it is possible for the UK as a sovereign country to cancel Brexit unilaterally without needing the approval of the other EU 27 countries. Now, there are caveats. He said that this would probably have to have some parliamentary approval and it would have to be in good faith, not just for buying time. But what it does do, if it's confirmed by the highest court, is open up a potential exit route for MPs to consider in the future. Thank you.
Damien, many thanks. Back here at Westminster, Darshini is with me. Bank of England with some warnings today. Tell us about those.
10% on your weekly food bill, Hugh, in the event of a disorderly Brexit. That was the latest stark warning from the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney. Why is that? Well, we import about half of our food. If we do see a disorderly Brexit, we're going to see perhaps a slump in sterling, tariffs, costs of checking things on the border. All of those will bump up costs across the board. Now, Mark Carney talking to MPs here in Westminster at the Treasury Select Committee. This is on the back, of course, there's warnings about the possibility of an 8% fall in GDP if we have a disorderly Brexit. Is he scaremongering? Well, Mr Carney today was at pains to say, no, he is not. He is doing his job. He's delivering assessments that the MPs themselves wanted. It is his job to warn of risks and to make sure the financial system can cope with that. The financial markets, however, clearly share his concerns about the impact of a disorderly Brexit. What we saw today, after we had that vote, pushing through that amendment from Dominic Grieve, we saw sterling bounce right up, reversing a 17-month low against the dollar, which it reached earlier in the day when we saw that earlier defeat.
Darshini, many thanks again. Laura, we'll talk later. And thanks to Damien, of course, in Brussels.